Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Biofilm News, where I'm joined together by my former colleague and a fellow PhD graduate, Daniel Ojeda. Welcome, Daniel.
Good to see you again, Pavel.
So today I wanted to talk about a particular news article that I came across, which I think raises a lot of interesting questions in the world of patients, in the world of healthcare, in the world of research. And I think we can have an interesting discussion. So the article in question comes from MedTechDive, and its title is "New GUARDANT Genomic Database Could Be Worth $2 billion," analysts say. So briefly, the company that we're talking today about is GUARDANT Health, which is I guess a company that is performing clinical research and performing cancer research. And basically the point of the article has to do with the clinical data that this company is collecting from the cancer patients. And basically in a recent report, GUARDANT said that results from repeat circulating tumor DNA tests in an 86,000 patient database that were described at the American Association for Cancer Research meeting will show how tumors evolve and develop resistance. And some of the analysts are actually saying that the database that GUARDANT has been able to generate with these recurring DNA tests would be actually worth $2 billion. So I guess let's briefly discuss a little bit about the type of testing that they're doing and why I think that's actually kind of interesting, and where I think their advantage is as compared to maybe traditional biopsies that other companies are doing when it comes to cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can start off, and you can probably pick it up. So
Go for it.
So I think, and I would say, as a disclaimer, I'm not the most learned cancer biologist. I have some knowledge about cancers. So the importance of doing recurrent testing when it comes to cancer research is cancer cells and cancers and tumors are one of the most interesting, I guess, biological entities that keep evolving over time. And specifically, it's very important for treatment options that are available for patients, because cancer that you start to treat early with one particular type of say chemotherapy or other type of like immunotherapy, for example, may not respond down the line to the same therapy, because cancer cells adapt, they evolve. So there's a lot of value in trying to understand the dynamics of the changes on a genome level, on other types of levels with respect to cancer cells, and how that progresses over time, over the course of the treatment option. So this kind of knowledge is actually quite valuable for many people, for researchers, for patients, for clinicians. Yeah. What do you think, Daniel?
I mean, yeah, you summarized it in this. And yes, it is. What surprises me is that this is not the first database that is sold. You know, I think was it Roche or AstraZeneca that just bought one for $5.7 billion as well.
Oh,
and,
wow.
Yeah, like it was another like big information. But really interesting about this stuff is, are the patients okay with this? Nowadays we can sequence the genome, and even if you don't have the name and address of the patient, you still can know a lot about them from some of these studies.
Yeah. Who do you think would benefit the most from this data, other than, let's take the company aside,
Mm-hmm.
on just the pure value of that database? Is it the patients can get the most benefit? Is it clinicians who need actually to make these decisions? Or is it potential just basic research? Who do you think can value that data the most and get the most out of it?
Honestly, companies. None of the above. Because
Interesting.
The patients right now, this database is already from patients that already had the cancer, either survived or died, so they will not benefit from it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What was it? 86,000 patients that already will not benefit from it. Maybe eventually it will allow clinicians to be able to guide their therapy over time, depending on how the tumor is mutating.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But in order to do that, the clinician would need to pay to the company that has this information for practically free from the patients.
Yeah. And
Right?
and
So
I guess the sad part is why I also brought up the researchers. Researchers could really benefit from that kind of analysis and publish a number of different papers, which I
yeah.
guess this company would probably also leverage to publish some scientific papers. But
Yeah.
I think it for basic research, for our purposes of doing like the stuff that we do at our institute, for example, doing some kind of analysis of that nature, getting our hands on that data would really allow for many opportunities for future, grant writing, for future opportunities to just dive deeper into some of the smaller details that maybe sort of get missed by bigger companies.
Well, that is very true. And actually, if I remember correctly, this company does make available their data for researchers.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, which is really nice. But I don't know how easy it is to actually publicly available. Can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, it might need a login and password after 7-day trial.
Exactly. So that is something that needs to be discussed. How much access are gonna be for basic researchers? Whether it's gonna continue to be accessible for researchers if the company gets sold, or what's gonna happen with all of this data. And
Yeah,
I'm really
and,
interested about how the patients. I mean, I'm pretty sure the patients will be happy if their data can help guide treatment in the future for other patients.
oh, they will never know. You know,
Well, some of them,
that's
yeah, I mean, that's
that's
true.
that's another thing. Like that's the some of those patients will never really benefit from that. And again, as you said, like this is already collected on the patients who already underwent the treatment. So
Yeah,
it's not going to benefit them. It's just going to benefit other people. And the benefit price tag is $2 billion.
yeah, exactly.
That's
And
a
I
that's
mean,
a bold and huge number. There's
yeah,
no way
exactly.
around it.
Yeah, because there's no, I mean, the product is us again, right? This is kind of like what Facebook and Amazon do to us. We are the product once again, our information is the product once again. And
100%.
yeah, and we are not really, okay, the royal we, this has nothing to do with you and me, but the patients that went through this, will not benefit per se monetarily of money that they may get. Again, if the company decides to like, oh, if you let us keep your information, we will help you with your cost of hospital or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
If they, I mean, they do the testing right as well. So if they waive the testing fee or something like that, fantastic, good for the company. And if the patients are okay with that, and that the patients are fully aware that their information is going to be used and is going to be sold as a bundle and is going to worth over $2 billion for sure at the end.
I think this is kind of as you were saying. We are in this time where data is the currency of the world,
Yeah.
right? And this is the prime example of how it applies to healthcare and pharmaceutical industry. It's and there's different ways you can really feel about it, but that's just, I guess, regardless of how one feels about it, that's just the nature of the game now. And the question is like, what do people do about it? How do people respond to when they see that kind of headline? Like, try and separate maybe like between your research persona and everything you know about research versus like just the person who reads this article. Like, what are the two sides of the coin that you have maybe wrestling in your own mind about that?
Well, first, the scientist part of me thinks this is fantastic. Continuous study with multiple points of the tumor progression. Even when I don't study cancer, I study neurodegeneration. That would be incredible if we could take brain samples from a patient in their 20s, 30s, every 5 years to see the progression of that. That
Yeah.
would be really incredible. I mean, it's really powerful data for us. On the other hand, I myself do not like my data being out there too much. So, for example, 23andMe or some other stuff like that, I would love to know, but I don't want to because I don't want my data to be out there. There are still not strong enough laws to protect our information, or if the laws change in the future, to keep some of this information outside of incorrect uses for it.
Yeah. I just did a quick napkin calculation. $2 billion divided by 86,000 people is about $23,000 per person. So basically, the question is, I wonder, and it's not really mentioned there, whether or not those patients were actually compensated for that data collection. That's what I want to know, because it's one thing you just get tested and based on the results of the test, there is potentially a different regimen for your approach to treatment of your cancer, which is a
Mhm.
benefit in and of itself. Whether or not there was any kind of, besides like, okay, you sign that you agree to lend this data forever and sort of like that, right? Versus
Mhm.
actual monetary compensation, because the monetary compensation now is looking like more than $20,000, which is crazy. I mean, of course, other costs notwithstanding, but still, that's such a huge amount of value that you got per single person.
Well, and this is where it gets a little tricky, right? Because the data from a single person is useless. First, okay, it's not useless, but it's really hard to exploit and to analyze. Onto
I like that word, exploit. I think
Well,
that's
it's
exactly
true. I
how
mean,
companies are thinking about that.
yeah, and I mean, it's realistically right. As even if you have 10 people, 20 people, 30 people, it is not powerful enough. You need to have thousands of people, and they did that really well. And at that point is when your data becomes valuable. Before that, it is valuable to a point, but it is not as valuable as if you are sell as a bundle, for example, which is the same for Facebook. My single data does not really worth that much until they realize that I have certain political orientations, certain different things, and then they can specifically target me for things.
Exactly. But that's a good point that you bring up, because that's very similar. It's not just the companies would benefit from large number of data. That's exactly the same approach we use in research. You
Mm-hmm.
need enough data to make any sort of claim, scientifically backed claim based on your results. You need enough results in order to generate any kind of reasonable conclusion that people would believe. This is just called statistical
Yeah,
significance. So it's nothing really
exactly.
uncommon. It's just in the case of the company, now they're using that data, all of that significance, if you will, and putting a price tag on that. So what do you
Exactly.
think is going to be, I guess, a way to look at these examples going forward? Like how much more, like is there going to be tens of, or like hundreds of thousands of people, or millions of people's of worth of data, and there's going to be a price tag for that too down the line for these kinds of research endeavors that are going to be done by these companies?
I absolutely. I mean, this. So this is very timely. I just finished listening to the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks literally yesterday. I was doing the audiobook, and since that a very different situation, but at the end of the book, they have a specific chapter in which they talk about this and how the data is valuable and whether the subjects, the research subjects, deserve to know more. But at the end,
Right.
this is something that we you and I cannot address. We as scientists will do whatever is permitted to us.
Mhm.
It's up to at the end specific governments to regulate this, how this data is going to use.
That's a good question. Should it be regulated? Like, like, what's the way to even think about that? Like, let's just put it this way: from the moral standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
benefits, money, and all that kind of other stuff aside, morally, is it okay for a company to keep the data about a person? Like, that's something like, so it's like at the core of it all. we struggle with, we don't struggle, we face it every day of our life. When you visit a website, the website tracks your activity on the website, right? Same thing is here, it's tracking your data. That's that kind of moral idea of company holding information about you. Like, how morally correct is that? Or was it always the case?
I think morally is fine. I mean, they are trying to use this information. The problem is if they're trying to use it in a way that is detrimental to you as a person. Or
Yeah, which doesn't seem to be the case, right? It's that sort of already, that kind of data has nothing to do with these people any longer. So I don't see it harming those people unless that information now gets exposed and you actually would be able to identify those individuals who were part of that study.
exactly, and that's the core question that is going to need to be necessary: privacy. Because, for example, that's what happened with 23andMe giving information to the police or to the FBI, right? In which someone, a relative of a serial killer, I think it was the Golden State Killer, gave a sample and then they realized that it was a familiar sample, so they track it back to someone else, right? And at that point, there's no regulation of, well, I give you my data voluntarily. And I said, yes, you can do research studies, but I did not agree to you giving it to the police because that can be tracked back to my family. And then a violation of my privacy. And I think for these patients, it's going to be similar, right? If the only thing that they're going to get out of this is how to steer certain cancer treatments, I'm pretty sure the patients are going to be happy because they can help other people, even if it doesn't result in monetary benefit from the patients, if they are well informed of what their data is going to be used, that is not going to be used for anything outside of that, and that then I think it's morally okay because it will benefit other people and the company needs to make money. I am well aware of that.
But here's my question, and I think it's worth asking. So what goes into that $2 billion? Because that's I'm all, I guess I agree with you in the sense that we have always seen that information becomes valuable and you can probably put some kind of price tag on the information. In this case, we're dealing with health data and patient data. So the $2 billion and the cost that it, let's try and break down where that $2 billion can really go to, or like back calculate. There was a cost to run the tests, which I assume maybe over 86,000 people. It probably no more than, I would say, a couple $1,000 to run all those tests. Let's say, I don't know, $10,000 to run a test for like all those series of tests. That's $860,000. Let's say doing the test. That's number one. Then number two, having some kind of IT infrastructure to process that data and make it available, which is, let's say, another couple $1 million. And that's it. That's literally it. You have the data to run. You have the sort of the portion that is allocated to do the tests. That's the cost of that, and the cost of just having that data somewhere stored. That's a few $1 million. The $2 billion, that's where that I kind of don't quite understand. Now it means the reason it is costing that much money because it is secluded from all the other types of data. It's actually under lock and key because now you can put a price tag on that vault of data, not just on the cost of how much it you guys spend on doing that and how much it takes to store it, but on what that represents. And that's, I think when it comes to health data, I think that's a little bit, that shouldn't be like that. I think not like in these kinds of numbers. That's just too crazy. Because, okay, ultimately, it's not, I would say this, in case of Facebook and all these kinds of stuff, what do you get? Ultimately, there is a higher price tag, I suppose, for the person's data because you can direct ads to them. Okay, great. That's why you pay for that sort of, you have pay for that intelligence about a person because there is a value for other companies to try and sell something to those people down the line. But I wonder what's the incentive for somebody to pay that much money to access that information. Are you gonna
Exactly.
sell them a chemotherapy that you
Yeah.
haven't yet developed or something? Like, I don't see the payment structure for that kind of money.
Well, that's the thing. They may have the chemotherapies already, right? The problem is if some cancers will react to to certain chemotherapies, but not to others. So these will allow them to guide it. And if they find an underlying mechanism, or all of these people have a specific mutation, they can narrow down their research and not waste the millions and millions of dollars and years of development just fishing fraud.
Okay.
So being able to have those two is mostly time, right, as well. Because gathering all of these data from people, I'm pretty sure it took at least a couple of years.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, and but you're absolutely right. I mean, $2 billion is a ton, and it really makes me think how much chemotherapy are they actually gonna sell, and how much money they're actually gonna save by being able to target specifically. I mean, it's powerful, yes, and they may make a lot of money, but I'm still surprised by the 2 billion. I think it's just a hard number to comprehend a little bit sometimes.
And I guess we could take it with some grain of salt. Like, who knows, like, exactly how those analysts draw the number on this particular type of data? Because I imagine it's not like somebody will be willing to shell out. I mean, maybe there will be somebody, honestly, at this point, who would just shell out $2 billion to just get unlimited access to that database. But I would imagine it being used by multiple companies. But then again, like, yeah, you ultimately just paying some fee for an access to that, and nowhere near this obscene amount of money.
Well, they would actually. So that's true. That's something a company could do, right? Give access to the data. But there's been other companies that did something similar with other types of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And just a big AstraZeneca, I think, is the one that bought them. A similar company that again had a big database on different types of cancer, and they bought it for $5.1 billion or something ridiculous like that, upwards of 5 billion, and it's just for themselves. Yeah,
That's nuts. So, like, I guess, like, say in your field, how much value do you think there would be for the data on, like, HIV patients, like similar sort of time dependent data collection, like from HIV patients? Like, how valuable would that be for research?
I mean, very locally for HIV, because it became such a big problem that lasted for so long. The United States government did create some central banks for HIV brains, and it's incredibly valuable. I mean, getting samples from there takes a long time, and it really benefits research because you can actually show that what they're observing, and the government also gave you grants to study, $5-6 million over the course of 5 years or more, that is actually applicable to humans. So it is a good validation, and absolutely, it is quite valuable. The United States government and the CDC and NIH did a really good job creating these data banks for HIV, at least.
So is there no, I guess, comparable proprietary database for HIV patients, like, on that scale?
Not that I'm aware of, but there may be out there.
Okay.
Right? I'm pretty sure the ones that would be really valuable would be neurodegeneration.
Okay, well, yeah, sure.
Yeah, that one, because I mean, Alzheimer's is just, I mean, even for COVID right now, right?
Yeah.
Gathering like information of a ton of patients, how do they respond, if they have any mutations or anything like that. I mean,
Yeah, you're right.
that would be a
Yeah,
jackpot.
we were talking about it off air. Like,
Yeah.
if there's any kind of potential mutation in the receptor that attaches to spike protein, you
Yeah.
want to know that. You want to know, because I think also not just on the well, actually, you can find value on that on so many different levels, not just for patients, but also for hospitals that would allocate resources.
Mm-hmm.
Also for the government, potentially, that allocates resources to the hospitals. to the companies that actually provide the treatment options and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of people who would get benefit. So you can, I guess, kind of see where the snowballing of all the different stakeholders within the sort of patient, you know, in the patient's vicinity could really benefit from having that kind of data. So I guess in some ways, I guess the bottom line of our discussion is like, yeah, there's that kind of number is crazy. Is a lot to comprehend.
Yeah.
There's a lot of intrinsic value that can be obtained from it, but something like patient concern is still very important.
Exactly, absolutely. I agree completely. I think the number for us is a little bit hard to comprehend, but I think it's well justified because it will save resources at every level and help a lot of patients. What worries me more, or what drew more attention, was, do the patients that gave their information knew that it was going to be used in this way? Did they get any compensation? And how are their identities protected? Because I mean, there's a lot of data in there, and that's something that, I mean, it has been discussed multiple times in the United States Senate and Congress, and you know, the president also, not this one, I'm not sure if this one, but other presidents have talked about, and it's, you know, for discussion with multiple people. But at some point, we need to decide how we're going to protect patient data. And I know there's a law of non-discrimination based on genetic information and genetic sharing, but you know, it needs to be more comprehensive and updated once in a while.
Yeah, that's actually like one last point I wanted to bring up, which is actually, I think, very interesting. You mentioned the word discrimination, and one of the interesting aspects that a lot of, I guess, clinical trials are now trying to address, and a lot of researchers, as like not just basic researchers, but also in companies, is the diversity of the data, which is meaning when it comes to this particular case, like, who are those 86,000 people that we're really talking about? We really want to know their race, their gender, some of the other potential, like, another important thing is that in particularly in cancer research, but also I guess across the board for other diseases, is what's called social determinants of health. Like some of those aspects, that how does that affect people? So I think when you start bringing in those additional data points that may just sort of go well beyond the scope of just looking at the genomic data for those patients over time, I think this is where you really can have those really crazy multipliers on the amount of insight that you can get, and you can draw all these kinds of different correlations now.
No, absolutely, and that's and that is really powerful and can lead to a lot of good. The problem is a very easy slippery slope for using correctly, and that's something, you know, I would honestly like to see some more action, and that's something that I always have passion. One of my old PIs was in the California governor's cancer board. So he would meet with the governor and discuss what new substances to put on the cancerogenous list for the state of California that need to be like protected. And you know, that's something that I would like to do in the future, like be part of policy making on that. Because yeah, this is something that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not. And I don't know, I still don't like my data being out there too willy-nilly without protection.
That's true, and the amount of data that is already out there about us, not just health data, but health data going forward, is just going to be more and more. Yeah. And the policies that you're talking about are absolutely important. So just as the technology evolves to collect more data and be more efficient, that's another aspect of it all, is the way we actually process the data and analyze it and make conclusions, and that we can act upon. That's what also is accelerating right now, and has to be taken into consideration too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and maybe for another time we should discuss a little bit on Apple and their push to start Apple Health, and Google and their acquisition of Fitbit.
Because there's plenty of talk on the digital health side of things.
Exactly.
Especially now. I mean, all the telehealth options that are becoming more available and getting a lot of traction online for obvious reasons. Yeah. Well, that'll be a conversation for another time. Thank you very much, Daniel, for joining me today. It was awesome, and it's my pleasure to have you.